Hi, everyone. My name's Adrian Parrot. I've been working with mano-Y-ola for about 4 years now. I work on a variety of projects, but one of the projects I've been working on more closely has been the Hispanic Forest Land Ownership Study that we started on earlier this year, I believe. We were tasked by the U.S. Endowment and the Forest Service to enumerate the number of Hispanic forest landowners nationwide and in Puerto Rico. So I'd like to share some of our progress with you, as well as kind of demonstrate a little bit of how we go about doing our research to make sure that the outreach we do has the maximum impact possible. So I'm going to start off talking about the study objectives, then get into a little bit of the methodology, some of our tactics for doing primary interviews, and then I'm going to hand off the data section to our guru and co-founder, Maya McElrath. And then we'll have about 5 minutes for a Q&A afterwards. So the objectives of the study are to first enumerate Hispanic forest land ownership nationwide and on the island of Puerto Rico. Second, collect and evaluate data resources that pertain to Hispanic forest land ownership. And third, engage and interview experts to gain their insight. Our approach, which unfortunately there isn't a Rolodex of Latino forest landowners that we could tap into. So we've had to take both data and secondary data and primary data from interviews and funnel it to create an estimate of Hispanic forest landowners nationwide. So working with key indicators from the U.S. Census, from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, more of the numbers, and then pairing that with insights and on-the-ground knowledge that experts and leaders in USDA agencies have, we are going to channel that information that we get into an estimate for Hispanic forest landowners. Now, the primary team, the team that I've been working more closely with, we looked at 3 pockets of expertise and leadership. So we interviewed former leaders from the Sustainable Forestry and African American Land Retention Network, which worked to do outreach to African American forest landowners in the Southeast. We spoke with people that worked closely with identifying these pockets and how they continue to work with these pockets of African forest land owners, working specifically to help them get titles for their land because heirs property was an issue, as well as turn that land that may be owned but not yet profitable into an asset. So turning forest land from a liability into an asset for these families, so that these parcels stay in the family for generations to come. They were able to give us key insights into how we might go about reaching out and potential data sources that we could use for our study of Hispanic forest landowners. Next, we worked with leadership in the USDA to gain their insight. So we interviewed state conservationists like Carlos Suarez and Luis Cruz. We also interviewed district conservationists, members of the Forest Service as well, to learn what they knew, learn of potential data sources that we could use, and we saw a lot of fruit born from this relationship. And then finally, we worked with experts, scientists and PhDs in the fields of sociology and data collection, as well as forestry, to, again, explore more data resources that are available, and then also how they could help us reflect on the tools that we're using, the predictive modeling that we're using, to better reflect an accurate number of Hispanic forest landowners. So that's a bit about how we do the primary side. when it comes to one of these studies. Now I'm going to hand the data section off to our co-founder and data guru, Ms. Maya McElrath.
Thank you, Adrian. I don't know if guru is the right word, but I do love data, and I'm going to certainly share with you some of the background and information that we have collected. So I'm going to share my screen. So we're going to start with, this is essentially the funnel that Adrian was talking about briefly, the method that we use to collect primary and secondary data, and as well as literature, doing a literature review to be able to start up a project. Before I really jump into this, it is imperative to share that all projects within mano-Y-ola start with data. All of them always start with data, whether it's an early childhood education program, whether it is a outreach program, or in this case, forestry is no different. So it always starts with data. This is the project is still in progress. We will be wrapping it up at the end of November, but this is the outline of the study at this point. And one of the objectives that Adrian mentioned was to study secondary data resources or other sources that we needed to look into. So we did a very extensive website and literature review, and this is how we came to connect with a lot of these experts. So this is a brief overview of the outline. And it is still it's still in progress and will be finalized in just a few months. But in order to share with you a little bit more about the data that we used, we created this visual. On the right-hand side, all of these cells in blue are data that were collected from the U.S. Census Bureau. On the left is data from USDA, various different sources from USDA. And at the very top are a few indicators that we collected from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So we'll start there. We decided, after doing our literature review, after having extensive conversations with our different teams, primary data teams, secondary data teams, we decided to look into some of the indicators listed on the screen from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and certainly industries that we believe are imperative to this study. For example, support activities for forestry and logging, nursery and tree production. The information that we collected was from 2020, quarter two, and we looked at employment, quarterly establishments, quarterly wages, and average weekly wages. One of the key indicators that we studied was a location quotient of those subcategories. And simply said, and I'll illustrate this, a location quotient is the ratio, that allows you to examine the distribution or employment distribution in an area and compare it to the United States. What that means is, when you see up here, Oregon is at the very top. With regard to quarterly establishments in forest support activities, in Oregon, there are 7.8 times more quarterly establishments in forest support activities as compared to the ratio for the United States. You see that for the month 3 employment, which was June of 2020, there are almost 18 times more proportionately individuals employed in this particular field when compared to the United States. So that was critical to look at. But it was just a small indicator and small subset that we examined. What we really focused on for this study and continue to focus on in the study is data from as I mentioned, from the Census Bureau, as well as the USDA, various different tools. The first one that you see on the left is the Census of Agriculture. Wonderful resource, lots of information that's available for the state, for different counties, and we examined the number of woodland operations, as well as the acres of woodland in all of the counties that we studied, as well as the different states, to determine, certainly to look into which states to track and to follow and to really kind of start with. And that was the case with all of the indicators. We, of course, examined the number of Hispanic producers as well as operations in all of the states and counties. Right underneath that, the USDA RegStats data. The RegStats is the official tool from the USDA that makes application and participation rate data available to the public. This is for a variety of programs for FSA, Farm Services Agency, NRCS, Natural Resource Conservation, RD, Rural Development, and RMA, Risk Management Agency. They offer this information, the participation and application data by race, ethnicity, and gender. Now, NRCS's data is only available, the most recent data available from NRCS is 2012. FSA was 2018, and I believe Risk Management, RMA, has the most recent information available, and that was 2020. But we utilized those to examine some nuances and differences between the different states. The next indicator that we examined and used was USDA ProTrax data. This particular source is the agency's primary software application that manages financial assistance programs. It's an internal software that's used, so it's not publicly available as easily as all the other indicators are. So that was a special ask and request, and we received information for 8 states listed on the image for a set of practices of all Hispanic and Latino producers with either active or completed contract statuses. ProTrax data helps to rank and actually then fund applications and then also carry out contract development processes. So this was critical. This was a really, really critical piece of information to receive, to look at where Hispanic and Latino producers have actively received support and are participating in USDA programs. And the final USDA data set that we examined was from FIA, which is the Forest Inventory Analysis data. Can't even begin to describe the amount of data that's available through FIA, but the one indicator that we examined was the private owner land code number 45. And that is the individual and families that own forests. It's plot data for forestry. Not exact locations, but we receive plot data for on a county level as well as a congressional district. On the right-hand side, I'll just briefly mention some of the U.S. Census Bureau pieces of information. The very top one, the Hispanic and Latino data. General, they weren't necessarily fed into our algorithm, which I'll share a little bit about in a moment, but we definitely studied all of the states and all of the counties and really examined the distinctions and nuances of the Hispanic Latino population. So we looked at home ownership, country of origin, median age, educational enrollment. It's really, truly to understand and study the background and the communities. A lot of this information doesn't ever make it into the report, but we have to read and study this information to be able to make decisions. Because as Adrian mentioned, there is no one source that is available to tell us, obviously, where Hispanic and Latino forest landowners are. Otherwise, we wouldn't have this project either. But this is the best way for us to study the potential and really either create the algorithm or the predictive model to be able to decide where to start, where to really follow up and confirm the information that we found. What we did certainly use we looked at the percent of Hispanic Latino populations in the different communities and the percent change. And we also examined the proportion of urban versus rural populations, and that was 2010 data. I want to show a couple of other pieces briefly. We use various tools as we study this information. One of them is Tableau. We create various dashboards to use internally, not necessarily to offer to the public. Some of them we could publish, but this is a way for us to study the information. And here, for example, you'll see some of the ProTrax data on the x-axis, and then the percent in Hispanic Latino population on the very bottom half on the y-axis, or the woodland operations at the top. So as you use a slider, and I'll just grab one arbitrarily, we move this around, looking at the projected Hispanic Latino population, or if I take the percent Hispanic Latino population and move this around, some of the states or counties in this case, will pop up. And it gives us a way to really study some of the most critical counties for us to examine and look into. There are many, many different pages on this particular workbook, so I'm not going to go into that detail. 2 more images that I do want to share. One of them is this simple Excel that we created that lists out many of the indicators that we collected. And then we broke them down into 10 equal intervals and assigned a point value to those. Actually, go back 1 second to this image here. These are all of the indicators and the many sub-indicators that we have collected, but all the indicators highlighted in red or circled in red, are the ones that we use for this particular algorithm. So FIA data, US Census, the woodland operations, Hispanic producers, population change, whatnot. So you'll see that here as well. These are the ones that we selected, the 6, then created 10 equal intervals and assigned a point value to see which communities and which states to really look into first. Again, we're trying to create a predictive model for the entire United States and Puerto Rico, but we need to make a decision about where to start to follow up on this information. And so this was also kind of dumped into a Tableau workbook, and we're still working on this. It's very new, so it's not finished or polished. But if I slide this over to an arbitrary number, 33 was the highest value that any of the communities received, and it happened to be Hidalgo County, where out of 60 possible points, it earned 33 points and is the top county in terms of the number of woodland operations or producers or Hispanic operations or percent population change, all the indicators that you see there in red. Those were the 6 key ones. So based on this information, we then have an ability to communicate more with additional leaders in those counties, in those states, and hopefully continue this project on a phase 2, which I will let Adrian describe.
Thank you, Maya. We will be concluding this study in December, and at that point, the question will shift from what can we find out to what do we do with what we have found out. For that, we have a great example left by the Southern Forest Land Retention Network. They followed up identification of communities in need with needs assessments. So first going in, asking these communities what it is that could help them with their forest lands, and then working to build trust and working relationships between those communities and the agencies and organizations that could provide help. We imagine a similar outcome from this study. We have identified a knowledge gap and a service gap, and we are prepared to conduct a similar effort as to the SFLR program, and look forward to doing it. So I want to thank you all for attending today. We really are excited about this project. It's the work we like to do with partners we like to do it with. The U.S. Endowment and the U.S. Forest Service has been very thoughtful and intentional with how they've guided us on this study. And I'd like to turn it over to a question and answer segment. And again, thank you.
Thank you. Feel free to send us questions or raise your hand, and we'll try to follow up and give you the information. I want to say that one of the opportunities that we have, in addition to the opportunity to partner with the Endowment, is to share some of the important information that a lot of times agencies are not necessarily aware as you were looking into the data. Many of the Department of Agriculture or the Forest Service data is aggregated and a lot of times doesn't necessarily address some of the most specific needs of specific groups of farmers or landowners. And so this is a great opportunity for the department, the agencies to understand this type of landowner much, much better. And so it is one of those opportunities that we cannot necessarily pass. Most recently, we're going to be doing a study in Louisiana looking at the nursery clusters. And many of you may not know this, but with Adrian's help, several years back, we identify a very emerging, strong group of Hispanic entrepreneurs that are in that industry, nurseries that have just mushroomed in that area. So we're going to be doing a study similar to this one, but focus in that region. So that's why this information or this type of opportunity for us is really important. Anything that was supposed to be said that was not said, Adrian, that you'd like to share?
No, I think the video covered it.
Wonderful. Maya?
No, I think that was a lot of data probably that was shared, a lot of information about the data. So I apologize, but I do think it's crucial for a lot of these projects that we do to highlight as best as we can the volume of information that's studied to really come up with a particular answer or to make a final decision. So there are a lot of folks that contribute to these studies. We've got several team members who are part of this very important study. And so I think we tried to highlight the extent of primary and secondary data sources that we really need to connect with, some that will never appear in a final report and some that we'll never talk about, but we will have studied them, we will have thought about them, and we have discussed them. So.
Yeah, we have a couple of questions. That one is, can you elaborate on the outreach you would like to do on this project? So I'll take on that one, and then I'll let Maya follow up with another question from Oregon. Well, I have to say that significant to this project is that as we do the assessment and the enumeration based on the areas or regions or states that we have the highest number of Hispanic landowner participation, we will move into, our desire is to move into a phase 2 with many other partners that we have established, with some of the key informant interviews that we have had, and then go boots on the ground type of work, connecting with people in extension, connecting with agencies that are connected with these communities, and begin to ask questions about needs, about program services that these landowners would like to connect with, or find out if there is any type of opportunity for us to replicate some of the things that are working well. So I see the state of Oregon here, or I see, for example, let's say New Mexico. Anything that a forester or anything that an extension person or university person is doing well that could be replicated in other states, whether it is states that have generations of Hispanic forest owners or emerging states, we would like to do that on the second phase, third phase of the program. Some of the work also will be similar to what the African American Initiative did, which was, again, just like we mentioned earlier, having a clear title ownership, issues like that, we would probably need to support some of these landowners if that's the need. And so that's the type of outreach we would like to focus on. Maya.
The next question we have is from Michelle B. Philly. She says, hello, I'm an Oregon State University Ag Extension faculty and of Hispanic heritage. Are Latino farmers and ranchers any more or less likely to share information or engage in USDA programs compared with non-Latino agriculturists? The short answer is most likely less, and certainly less. And I think that's also why these programs are so important. We started conducting outreach to Hispanic farmers almost 7 years ago now. And the reason why we were able to implement that grant and certainly extend it all the way through a project like this through the forestry is because the outreach to Hispanic and Latino farm agriculturists and farmers is minimal compared to outreach to non-Latino farmers. Sometimes it's a language barrier. Sometimes it has to do with the lack of Hispanic Latino leadership in the different agencies in particular states. So that is part of the project that we have continued with. It's just not outreach to farmers, but also a talent development to really be able to, and you'll hear a little bit more about that later in this symposium, but really to encourage employment of bilingual Latino professionals in USDA programs to increase the outreach and allow them for increased participation.
Yeah, I think that in the case of Oregon, I would have to say, and I think that Adrian can speak to this as well, is that the head of the NRCS agency, which we have actually reached out to Alvarado as an outstanding leader, which I think would be one area where I think can break a lot of these barriers of outreach and limited opportunities that many other states really are not opening. So I think that he, in our conversations with him, certainly is one that one of the states that we have selected as the phase 2. So Shelby, we certainly will be reaching out and working with you. I see here that you have you're working in livestock and forest production. One of the things that I'll say is that this is the important part of agroforestry, that I think many of the programs that we are going to try to promote are going to be looking at how diverse these producers and landowners can be, and that certainly would be an add-on to our program. We're now going to talk a little bit about our collaboration and some of the partners that we have, partnerships that we have developed. As we mentioned, the project that we are conducting and the study with the enumeration is under the sponsorship of the Endowment for Forestry and Communities, in addition with the Forest Service. At this point, we're going to invite Delie Wilkens, who is a project assistant analyst for the Endowment. She has great experience in agroforestry, as well as studies in forestry from Virginia Tech. And she's our contact and the person that we have worked with in terms of opening opportunities for collaborating with other partners. So here's a video with Delie with some information about their work.
Hello, my name is Dominic Sutton-Vermeulen. I'm with the Soil and Water Outcome Fund, and I will be talking about agricultural carbon and water markets. I'd like to start by thanking mano-Y-ola for inviting me to speak today, and I look forward to answering questions in the discussion with you all after the presentation. So before we dive in, I'd like to start with this slide to draw attention to the fact that while soil carbon gets a lot of media attention, and you've probably seen it in the headlines, it's only one of many important benefits from conservation and regenerative agriculture. There are a lot more other than soil carbon that are equally important, but don't quite get the love, and we should all keep that in mind throughout this presentation. So what is soil carbon? This picture is a simplified example of the greenhouse gas cycle that occurs in modern day agriculture. You notice there are a lot of arrows and a lot of directions, and at the bottom is soil carbon. Soil is one of the largest nature-based sinks our planet has, and it acts like a sponge for carbon. Over years, this sponge capacity has been degraded by land use change, mostly from industrial agriculture and deforestation. Regenerative and conservation-based agriculture practices like no-till and cover crops have shown to be helpful in restoring the capacity and providing a multitude of other benefits, as we saw in the previous slide. This slide also highlights that relative to the rest of the globe, the U.S. emits relatively less GHGs as a percentage of the total emissions footprint. In less developed regions like South America, Africa, and Asia, GHGs from agricultural emissions tend to make up a much larger percentage of total. So what is all driving this? Well, when it comes to agricultural carbon markets, most of it is being driven by voluntary corporate commitments like net zero and the climate pledge. Over the years, there's been a growing trend and awareness by consumers and a younger generation concerning climate change. This, more than anything, is driving corporations to shift their business models to be more mindful of the environmental and social impacts they are having and take action. In addition, shareholders are influencing decisions made in the boardrooms. This effect is creating new economic opportunities for farmers in the corporate supply chain in the form of environmental or ecosystem service markets, and I'll use these two terms interchangeably throughout the presentation. And this is what we operate today at the Soil and Water Outcome Fund. In agriculture in particular, it's really important to understand the concept of Scope 3, especially because Scope 3 represents about 85% of the total carbon emissions footprint of the corporate agriculture supply chain. So what does this mean? It means the biggest source of GHG emissions in corporate ag supply chains lies outside their direct control of these entities and is thus one of the most difficult to account for and reduce. And that's where we come in. Today, the Soil and Water Outcome Fund manages a pool of impact investor capital that we use to incentivize farmers to implement new conservation practices. We quantify and purchase the environmental benefits generated by those practices in the form of verified emission reductions for carbon and water quality benefits like nitrate and phosphorus reductions. We then sell these environmental outcomes to private and public entities that benefit from them. For carbon, it's mostly agribusinesses that use verified emission reductions against their Scope 3 reduction goals. And for water, it's a mix of public-private entities that have water stewardship goals or are regulated and need to meet certain permitted standards, like a municipal wastewater treatment facility. Today, the fund is operated jointly by two entities as one team. Ag Outcomes on the left handles the farmer interaction and agronomic support. They are the boots on the ground and are out meeting farmers where they live and operate. Ag Outcomes is a wholly owned subsidiary of the Iowa Soybean Association, which is in turn owned by farmers. On the other side of the equation is the organization I belong to, Reharvest Partners. Reharvest manages the pool of investor capital, contracting with farmers, and the portfolio of outcomes. Reharvest is a wholly owned subsidiary of Quantified Ventures, which is an impact-themed investment advisory firm based in DC. So, at a high level, how do we operate today? This slide, starting on the left, a farmer enrolls in the program and proposes a new set of conservation practices they would like to implement, usually no-till or cover crops. We then model the environmental benefits derived from those practices using peer-reviewed and scientifically rigorous biophysical models. Comet Farm Tool for carbon, which is also used by the USDA for national GHG accounting, and the Nutrient Tracking Tool, which is used by the EPA for water quality. Based on the estimated outcomes, we then provide farmers with payment for 50% of the value of those upfront, and we do this for a couple of reasons. One, we believe we're meeting farmers where they're at today. Anytime you're implementing new practices, it represents a risk to your livelihood. We hope that providing some upfront capital and taking on some risk away, we help make the transition easier to implement these new practices. And two, this capital can go towards covering some of the initial costs like new equipment or cover crop seed. In the fall, typically after harvest and before winter, we will verify the modeled outcomes using in-field sampling and remote sensing technology, or GIS, on an ongoing basis to detect cover crops and no-till. We also visit every field that's enrolled in our program at least once a year. Once verified, and only then, do we sell the outcomes to the beneficiaries like agribusinesses and municipalities and public entities. At this time, we also complete the transaction with the farmer for the remaining 50% of the payment. So what sets us apart? In today's ecosystem services market, there are many choices of programs to choose from and new ones popping up every day. So this slide is just a helpful way to show how our program is unique. One, we're the only program today that provides payments based on water plus carbon. So we're stacking the environmental benefits together in one transaction. This allows us to achieve a much higher payment on a per acre basis, averaging about $35 an acre. We don't leave the farmer hanging with the responsibility to market their carbon and water credits. So what does this mean? It means that any farmer enrolled in our program is guaranteed a payment because we have pre-existing purchase agreements for those credits with some of the largest agribusinesses in the world. Today, we only offer annual contracts because we know that's how most farmers feel comfortable operating. We also provide on-staff agronomy support, water and sampling, monitoring, and verification at no additional cost to the farmer. Again, this is all about meeting the farmer and growers where they're at today and not trying to force them into an arrangement they are uncomfortable or don't have control over. We are operating at a little over 100,000 acres in the states you see here in green. We're actively looking for new opportunities to enter new territories, and we're really only bound by the supply chains and watersheds our customers operate in, which covers most of the continental US and much of Latin America. We hope to scale to at least 1 million to 2 million acres by 2025. If you have any questions or want to chat about environmental markets, please feel free to reach out and shoot me an email. I love learning about new cropping systems and meeting the people interested in our program. Thanks again for your time and for tuning in.
Thank you. As you can see, Delie became Dominic, first initial. But actually, I have to say that we learn about Dominic through the Endowment and Delie. And I want to welcome Dominic Sutton to the conversation. He is with us, and I would also like to add Adrian. One of the things that we felt was pretty significant when we got to know their work was how important it was to bring this idea of helping farmers and landowners in many ways. So I'd like to open this discussion a little more to answer some questions. If anyone would like to ask questions from Dominic's work and presentation. And Adrian, you want to talk a little more about that relationship? And if you have any questions for Dominic, or we'll open it up for others that have questions about what the Qualified Ventures does.
Well, yeah, we first started to meet with Qualified Ventures when they were looking to see what the impact of their programs would be in states in the Northeast when it comes to limited resource farmers and specifically Latino farmers. So we were able to kind of liaise with them and talk about certain areas in the United States where they could expect more impact amongst limited resource landowners. And really enjoyed working with them. What they do is pretty revolutionary. And as somebody who has worked in trying to provide access to programs in the past and incentives in the past, to have this in addition to what's available through the agencies is great to know that is out there.
I wanted to ask you, is there any initiative that you can talk about, any opportunities that are out there that is specifically an opportunity for working with Hispanic landowners directly, Dominic?
Yeah, we are actively actually looking in most of the Mississippi River Basin as a kind of geographic scope for Hispanic or really biopic populations that we can implement some either conservation practices or even just facilitate them getting access to existing programs that are hosted by the USDA. So that's definitely our 2022 scope. And then there's a question on eligibility requirements, and I just can, at a very high level, it's mostly specific to the geographies we're working in, but the baseline is additionality requirements. And what that really means is new practices being implemented that are beyond kind of the business as usual approach. And that varies depending on the type of operation. But it's typically in the form of, either reduced or no-till, or adding a cover crop, or an extended rotation. But we are practice agnostic. So it's not a prescription based, and we really work with everyone who enrolls in the program to find the right mix.
Yes, definitely good to hear. Tell me about your relationship with the Endowment for Forestry and Communities. How did that relationship started, and what are you guys doing?
So it started. Quantified Ventures is a kind of a unique firm in itself. We started mostly in green infrastructure projects for municipalities, and we built off of that foundation with kind of the pay for success. And we built out we work in 4 verticals, if you will. And that involves forestry and land use, coastal and urban resiliency, health and human services, and then agriculture. And so in more and more of those days, there's a lot of kind of cross-pollination between those. And this is really one of how we came to be with the Forest Endowment. And our work is really across the nation, and kind of finding unique ways to create sustainable financial mechanisms to support outcomes in communities.
Great. Thank you. I don't know if there is any other question. Adrian, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question if there's still time. I know that QV has been working a lot with larger farms, soybeans, cotton, bigger scale crops. And much of the populations that we've been working with tend to have medium to small size farms. So I was wondering, how are you all working with that?
So we have no minimum size in our program. We have operators or owners or farmers who have fields the size of 10 to 15 acres, all the way up to we have one operator who has almost 25,000. But we don't have a minimum or a maximum. As long as we can essentially derive the environmental benefits and quantify those, then we're game, and we can work across. We just kicked off a pilot in North Carolina, looking at small cotton with rotations of beyond corn and soybeans that we usually don't, are kind of wheat or some perennials that are integrated into those systems. So we're actively looking to actually go towards more of the not subsistent farming, but the farmers who depend on their land for their livelihood, and it's not just commercial size.
Yeah, it was really interesting to hear you all talk about the idea of aggregation to maximize benefits and get farmers and landowners to kind of work together and essentially take their small pieces of land and create a larger critical mass that you could maximize those benefits for. Something that really gelled with what we're trying to do.
Yeah, that definitely helps us be able to work with, by selling these outcomes in aggregation to a few buyers. It allows us to really deliver a payment to anyone, any acre that can meet those requirements.
Great. We're gonna move on. Dominic, thank you so much for what you're doing and for the partnership. I know that you have actually been working with other of our partners, specifically in Puerto Rico as well. So looking forward to continue to collaborate. We're gonna have actually the right video is supposed to go before Dominic. And now it's about a short 2 or 3 minute video, and then we're going to move into the agricultural professionals panel. But we have a short video from Delie Wilkens, who represent the Endowment for Forestry and Communities.
Hi, everyone. Hello. My name is Delie Wilkens, and I am the Program Analyst for the U.S. Endowment for Forestry and Communities. I am so sorry that I can't be here live to engage with you all, but I want to thank you for giving me a little bit of a platform to talk about my organization and what we do. So the U.S. Endowment for Forestry and Communities is the nation's largest nonprofit dedicated to keeping working forests as forests, and in doing so, invigorating our forest-rich or forest-reliant communities. So what does it mean when I say something like that? Essentially, we support and create partnerships with organizations that work on that mission. So for example, we partner with the Natural Resource Conservation Service down in Georgia to help conserve gopher tortoise habitat, to keep them off the threatened and endangered species list, which also means that managing forests can continue without another kind of hoop to jump through for landowners. Another initiative that we support is the African American Landowner Retention Program, where land loss for Black Americans across the Southeast is due to tangled titles or heirs property. Some people might see this as a legal only issue, but we see this as an opportunity for Black Americans to not only keep their land, but also to create wealth from that land by managing their forests for profit. So as we look to the future, we're hoping to invest more in communities and their needs. And we understand that dynamic between agriculture and forest land needs to be explored. So much of my own research has been around agroforestry, that intentional integration of trees into crop or livestock systems. And while it might seem a little bit odd for some farmland owners to plant black walnut trees in their pasture, in their cow pasture, there are numerous benefits to be realized, whether it's diversifying your product, whether it's soil remediation, shade for your livestock, what have you. And these types of systems and these types of ideas, really, they're at the heart of what the endowment is trying to accomplish. Because at the end of the day, we just seek to do what others can't or won't. Our projects are not always easy to accomplish. They take a lot of hard work and a lot of good partners, especially those forest and farmland owners who are doing the on-the-ground work. So that's why we're so happy to partner with folks like mano-Y-ola, because they understand how important community is to a successful project. So again, I'm so happy to introduce the endowment to so many of you. We are a small shop for a national nonprofit, but we do a lot of good work because we have great partners and communities working with us. So feel free to reach out to me anytime. I'm happy to talk about agroforestry or the endowment or anything at all. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Delie. And one of the things that I will mention about Delie is that it's been great working with her. She happens to be a former Peace Corps volunteer and fully bilingual and a great resource. And again, in this journey that we have taken, we never, when we started working on outreach to Hispanic farmers, thought we would be so much involved in a number of other agencies and departments, now going into forestry, combining, like Maya was saying, good data, sound data to get started there, so make good planning, and then moving into outreach and moving into some intentional type of information education to help not only farmers, but landowners in all aspects of their work.